Welcome to Freedom Friday. We took a week off there, but we are back and we are talking every week about something. Some aspect of this conversation should lead to some level of freedom for you, whether that's on your own individual basis that leads to a little bit of growth or some large scale things. We're trying to tackle it all. And that's what this conversation is all about. And today I have a really very special guest. He's become a dear friend of mine, RJ Jenkins. He's the director of education for the Columbia University Center of Veteran Transition and Integration. Did I get that right?
You sure did. Yes, sir. Well done.
Awesome. Thank you.
We're off to a good start.
All right. I bet you just prefer to give your business card out rather than.
Yeah, I put a QR code on the screen and say LinkedIn me.
There you go. So RJ, you and I met, as many of my guests I've been able to bring on at the Military Influencer Conference in 2023. And I actually was an audience member of yours before we connected, which was awesome. But tell people a little bit about your story, and then we can kind of get into all the things. We have about 30 minutes with you. So
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, thanks for having me on, Gabe. I'm excited and always happy to spend some time talking about the pieces of this puzzle that I touch a little bit. So I'll start by saying that I'm a civilian who has decided to dedicate my professional career to working closely with veterans, transitioning service members, military connected students, and their families. I came to that work a little non-intuitively, I suppose. I was working at the Columbia University School of General Studies, which is our undergraduate college at Columbia University dedicated to serving non-traditionally aged students. We have dancers, we have K-pop stars, we have students who dropped out because of addiction and have come back. We have students who raised families early, students who provide elder care to their parents, business owners, entrepreneurs, and also a pretty significant portion of veterans and transitioning service members. And so got to work with some of those folks. This is now 15 years ago. Started, working in higher ed, then went to the School of General Studies, started working with veterans, and have been working with that population ever since. For the last 6 years, I've been at the Columbia University Center for Veteran Transition and Integration. And that's a center that lives at Columbia but faces outward to colleges, universities, veteran service organizations, and employers across the country. And we're a force multiplier organization that works to try to build more inclusive cultures, strengthen transitioning service in higher education and workforce settings. So that's the kind of 35,000 foot view of the work. And as part of that work, I'm really tasked as the director of education with really talking to and listening from colleges, universities, VSOs, and employers who come to us and say, we're working with this population and we want to do better. Or we're working with this population and we think we want to serve them differently, or we're working with this population and there's a gap in our support model and we're trying to figure out how to fill it. So I'm really fortunate that I get to work with aspirational organizations that are trying to do a better job of understanding this population and creating space for them to add the value that we know that they add. And as part of that work, I've started doing some soft skill work, non-cognitive work, been talking about growth mindset, been talking about social emotional intelligence, been talking about cognitive bias. And most prominently, I've been talking about imposter feelings a lot in this population when they get to higher education and workforce settings. And that's where I encountered you, Gabe, talking about imposter phenomenon and how we might be able to reframe it to get a strengths-based approach to help veterans who feel these feelings not feel broken about it, but instead feel like this is a healthy response to their thriving and to their aspirations. So that's the connect for you and I. And I think it took you and I. Let me remember. I think it took us about 4 hours from the end of my presentation to getting a beer
yeah,
and talking more. So and here we are. So again, thanks for having me on.
yeah. Well, your presentation was great, and I'll summarize for the audience, and you can tell me where I'm wrong. But the heart of it is, you summarize. It's your talk. That imposter syndrome is not a real thing. That it's kind of a natural reaction to being in new places. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think imposter. So yeah, imposter syndrome, certainly described in that way, is not is a thing because we've made it a thing, right?
Sure.
I think imposter feelings are incredibly real. Imposter feelings, feeling like you don't fully belong, feeling like you're not fully deserving of being where you are, feeling both invisible and conspicuous in your environment,
Hmm.
those feelings are very real. And the reframe that I try to provide, Gabe, is to say, first of all, stop calling it a syndrome, because a syndrome is a pathologizing and victimizing way to understand natural and relevant and rational feelings in an environment. I then go on to argue that actually, if you're feeling imposter feelings in your environment, it's probably because you're aspiring. It's probably because you're pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, trying something new, taking a risk, growing, right? And so when we aspire, we always already have these moments where we feel stretched and where we feel a little bit uncomfortable. And so if you're feeling imposter feelings, you're probably doing something right, not doing something wrong. And that is not a framing that's very popular out in popular culture and on the internet. So my goal is to try to help veterans, transitioning service members, but really anybody um, who is aspiring to something bigger or different, to not interpret those feelings as a sign of brokenness, but rather to interpret them as a sign that they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do, and they're having a healthy response to trying to change the DNA of their professional or personal world.
That's awesome. My mind goes in, I'm collecting all of these ideas based on that alone, but that's different than fake it till you make it, what
It
you're
is
saying.
different. It is different. I mean, it's related a little bit, but I think even, fake it till you make it is still kind of holds on to this idea of a fraudulence, right?
Hmm.
The fakeness.
Yeah.
I'd say be new as long as you're new, right? Be unfamiliar as long as you're unfamiliar. Um, and I think what's really exciting for those of you who are not familiar with Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset, she introduces this word yet, right? So fake it till you make it is one way to think about it. Another way is to take all the things you're feeling and put yet at the end. So I don't feel comfortable in my role yet. Uh, I can't do college algebra yet. I'm not sure how to ask for help yet. And to me, that's a little bit of a, to me, a more human centered, people centered way of thinking about this. And Gabe, I don't have to tell you, but the population we serve, work with, and think about, both professionally and personally, they're already prone to a brokenness model that has been spoon fed to them in every direction. And so this imposter syndrome thing can be especially damaging to a population that's already sniffing around for signs of their own brokenness. And you and I have talked a little bit about this, but so much of that, I think, comes from all of us that surround these folks and not the folks themselves. So I'm trying to do my little part to say, if you're feeling this thing, you're actually doing exactly what you're supposed to do, and you're responding in exactly the way people respond. And it's been powerful for me, and I think it's been powerful.
Yeah. Well, so I don't know if I have a niece, man. She watches Gabby's Dollhouse, and that's what they do on all the things where they can't do it. They always say yet. And so
Yeah.
that's just a side note. But so I'm glad
That's
we're
growth.
teaching
That's
next.
growth mindset. That's
Yep.
growth mindset in a cartoon, and I'm really happy to. I'm not familiar with that particular program, but I'm really glad to hear that's what's happening.
You're not familiar yet.
Yet,
Uh,
there you go.
but
This guy.
but similar to what you're talking about there, and I think one thing we really bonded on after you spoke, and we got to meet in person over that drink, was talking about what this broken veteran narrative in quotes, right, is something that we are really trying to attack through Warrior Transition Outdoors. That I'm specifically as an individual trying to attack, and a lot of times people even think, oh, if they're even starting to get an idea, oh, I think I know what he's talking about when they talk about PTS. Again, I'm not going to pathologize that and call it disorder, the alcoholism, but it's even these little things. The more human ways it shows up isn't in all these big stigmatic ways. It's in this like day-to-day mindset ways as well, is kind of what I'm hearing you saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And again, it's funny. I just got back from giving a presentation to the Veteran Jobs Mission administered by JP Morgan Chase, a group of several hundred employers across the country who are trying to build and strengthen cultures of support for veterans that work for them, and create true professional development um, through a person-centered approach. And it's funny, and Gabe, you're probably better familiar with these statistics than I am, but this. So let's take post-traumatic stress as a starter, and this tenet from veteran critical theory that veterans are victims of deficit model thinking, not just or even primarily from themselves, but from the civilian world that they come back to. Um, so this deficit model thinking immediately puts this PTS thing in our brain, right? I think the percentage population wide from the the veteran, the VA is, I think, 7% of veterans will experience at some point in their lifetime some iteration of PTS, and I think that percentage in the general population is 6%, right? I mean, I don't know if those jive with the numbers you're familiar with, but I have a room full of employers who are veteran friendly or veteran inclusive, and those numbers are shocking to them, right? Because it's just not because they don't have a sense of that from working with their own populations, but because that is so not the story that's getting told in mainstream media and even by well-intentioned actors in our space, right? The space that you and I occupy with colleagues who have dedicated their lives to building a better world for the folks who have signed the dotted line, you still see some of these misunderstandings of how prevalent this stuff is. And so, yeah, I mean, I just, man, we've got to continue to chip away at this kind of stigmatizing, pathologizing, victimizing, power reducing, stereotype laden way of thinking about the work, and start getting to know human beings as a way to liberate ourselves. I said yesterday in the presentation, and I'll say it to you, real knowing is the kryptonite to lazy bias, right?
Mm.
You just get to know somebody, and immediately your lazy biases start to shatter right in front of you. And that's the work that we need to continue to do. And I think I'm so happy that you're dedicated to this work, and I feel very privileged to have a job that allows me to engage in this work. So it's really cool.
I love the cross pollination because I'm going to say it and people are going to receive it a certain way, but the way you talk about it in your own words about the very same thing has its own unique power behind it. And the words you choose are different than mine, but they're the same. You know what I mean? And so it's like we're saying the same thing, but how you talked about that. I mean, that's the heart. If you go back to episode 1 of Freedom Friday and talking about breaking this broken veteran thing, you're espousing and living out and talking about everything that we what we're trying to say. And that's exactly what, that 7% figure, like everyone, hey, well, if you go ask and do the Family Feud style, hey, we asked 100 people on the street, what are the top things veterans experience? I would hate to see the results on that.
Oh, it would be, I'm not even, it would be really upsetting. It would
Yeah,
be,
because
it would be.
it should be they experience higher levels of human experience and deeper connections with family and friends and deeper sense of purpose. But what would pop up would be the bad stuff, right? The stigmatic stuff that you talked about. And so knowing that it's 7%, stop talking about it 100% of the time.
That's exactly right. That's
Right?
exactly right. And I'll be clear too, Gabe. I mean, I think, and you and I think we've touched on this at some point in our getting to know each other, but the opposite of that thing is also not it, right? So the hero discourse, another one of my slides yesterday with VJM is ease up on the hero language, right?
Hmm.
And people sort of, I could see people in the audience, they're because of course, but
Don't
but
talk
but
about our troops
then
that way. Like that.
right. But
Right?
what happened is, as soon as I opened it up, people really responded to that too. It's like, yeah, when you use words like that and you impose them on someone's experience, you have committed a different type of violence, that's even trickier in a way because it seems positive at first. And just to be clear, I mean, I don't think that the hero language is as tricky or as potentially damaging as some of the ways we talk about wellness issues in this population. But again, it's really not about hero or PTSD or whatever. It's about imposing a label, right? A personless, experienceless, nameless label onto individual human beings, each of whom has a very unique and powerful experience to this thing that they did. And I understand labels and I get how they work and they're important in some vague way as an instrument of taxonomy and organizing the world. But in the work that we do, I think those of us who work with this population have to be really mindful of even talking about veterans as if they are a thing. Um, we, when we say veterans, we need to not really be talking about a population. We need to be talking about individual veterans, to the best of our ability. And I fail at that every day, right? But I think something we all need to be thinking about.
Yeah. Gosh, man, that's so powerful. Because yeah, the hero thing kind of leads to people feeling like, well, I know I'm just a human, so I don't feel like a hero. And there you get all what we kind of full circle started talking about, which was imposter feelings and things like
Right.
that, or what they saw that they did that doesn't add up to what a hero does in movies and things. And there's some questionable ethics around. It does create sometimes more good than bad. And so I love what you said that. And one thing you've said to me that really stuck with me, and I've said it on a different podcast after we talked, but there's no such thing as a veteran. Elaborate on that, please.
Well, I just, I guess what I mean by that is I think there's no such thing as a veteran with a capital V, right? There are veterans with a lowercase v, and that's not a measurement of import or a measurement of significance or a measurement of the value uh, of what these folks have done and what they will continue to do when they come into civilian society. Um, what I mean is the veteran with a capital V um, is this kind of essentializing. Another tenet of veteran critical theory is that veterans are often essentialized. Um, and when we essentialize a population, we erase most of them in the spirit of the one or two that meet our expectations. Um, you know, people of veterans of color, LGBTQ veterans, disabled veterans, neurodiverse veterans, veterans with bad papers, veterans whose job in the military wasn't the kind of jobs we all think of, right? They weren't jumping out of helicopters and they weren't shooting people. They were processing paperwork or they were preparing food on the line, right? Um, Veterans who have a complicated relationship with their own service, veterans who leave the service and don't want to be identified as veterans, who are trying to create space between themselves and their experience in the United States Armed Forces, right? All of these types of people are people who have a narrative that is somehow counter to our convenient expectation of what a veteran is. And that's why I want to try to abolish veteran with a capital V and instead think about veterans with a lowercase v. And even that is problematic in a way because it doesn't capture or erases folks who don't want that label at all, but who still went through this experience and added value in the way that they did. So again, I'm not trying to police anybody's language. I'm not trying to create a sort of surveillance state around how people talk, but I do think being mindful of the words that we use, being mindful of the way that we talk about the population and the individuals that comprise it. These things have power, right? Because folks are listening. So especially if we have the opportunity to be in this kind of a setting where you've asked me to come and we get a chance to talk and then send these words out into the world, I think there's an opportunity here to evangelize folks to a different way of thinking about the work, a different way of thinking about these folks. And again, you've heard me now. I think I've said veteran critical theory 3 or 4 times. Glenn Phillips, the co-creator of that theory, um, in 2007, uh, you know, he framed it as not just about supporting veterans, but introducing new ways of knowing them, with the word knowing being bolded and in italics, right? It's this work of knowing people that I think sometimes gets missed in the work of supporting. And so, you know, again, you and I have the luxury of having opportunity to get to know these folks. And I think that's why we kind of land where we land, because we've known these people. We know these people. They're in our lives. We when we go to their weddings, they're in our families, and we get to work with them every single day. And so I think it hits different um, when people essentialize them or attempt to make this simple when it's complicated.
Yeah, that I love that knowing versus supporting, because what is support if you don't truly know the thing that you're supporting, whatever that might
Right.
be, right? And so,
Exactly.
and that's how we've structured our whole program, is around the actual knowing and building of relationships with these people. And you're right, like I have a lot of compassion on the pre understanding of this, era. I came from the broken veteran narrative as a human being and as a civilian. Like I only knew what I knew. And so this is never like a degradation to people in that space. It's an invitation to say, hey, listen. When you say evangelizing, we're that's not a we remove the religious effects of that word on people, and just, we're trying to share something with you that if you start to actually know and not just fall in line with what we've been conditioned to see, that everything that's around us, support our troops and all the patriotic stuff, but actually take the time. And I get that question all the time. How do I get beyond the thank you? That's the support. Thank you. And I'm like, oh, just ask them, what did you do in the military? How was
Right.
your
Right.
deployment? And that comes with just getting to know them, right? So if you have the time, right? So I love that, man. I want to give you a chance because I want to respect your time too. And we could talk, and I hope you'll come back again because we could talk a whole lot more about all of this. But what are some of your final thoughts, whether it's on the veteran critical theory thing? I'm interested to hear more about that. And just your final invitation, perhaps, to people that could be anywhere on that spectrum of growth.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just first of all, if folks are tuning into you, I think they're already, among the brethren of people who are wanting to learn more, think more critically about um, how to engage these folks. And it, it's funny. This the thrust of this presentation that I just gave, which is just sort of fresh in my mind. I didn't do the sort of imposter feelings presentation. I did a presentation on moving beyond the veteran friendly paradigm to a veteran empowering paradigm, and and there were many things that you and I have already talked about that were part of that discussion. Um, but a couple of things stuck out that I just thought I'd pop in here because I think they're useful. Would love to come back and talk a little more. But one of them is that, and again, I'm speaking to employers, so I was a little coming at them a little bit, and they were so here to for that energy. One of them is that I feel pretty strongly, Gabe, that transition, the journey from the military to the civilian world, is largely the responsibility of the service member, or the veteran. That journey is theirs. Um, no one can make that journey for them. We can certainly help. We can certainly empower. We can certainly encourage. We can certainly be resources. But the only those folks have to take those steps with their own feet. What they encounter on the other side of that is on us. um, the integration back into society, whatever that means, right? That society, that's on us. And I know you and I have talked a little bit about. I think there's a Lord of the Rings metaphor somewhere, right? About Frodo returning to the Shire, but the Shire, we are the Shire, right? Companies are the Shire, schools are the Shire, workplaces are the Shire, veteran service organizations are the Shire, supermarkets and post offices are the Shire, right? And we have the power to make those places that are ready to receive these people, and we are Am I allowed to curse? Are we not
Yeah.
cursing?
Why not?
We're fucking it up, right? We are creating shires where folks come back and they encounter expectations of post-traumatic stress and expectations of social isolation and expectations of behavioral mercuriality and expectations of being better at transactional work than relational work. Um, and we are actively messing that up, right? And when we mess it up and get it wrong, we bring about the very outcomes that we've now spoken into the world. This is a terrible, vicious cycle of someone comes out of service, they then hear that they're supposed to have PTS, and then all of a sudden they start experiencing PTS. It's like, and I know that that's not always how that works, but we're not helping, right? So I just I think, you know, um, you know, putting little American flags in your front yard is cool. Um, and and saying thank you for your service is okay. I don't love that either, honestly, because that to me is another label or an expectation that we're imposing on somebody about their relationship with their service. Um, and saying you support the troops, all these things are all fine. What's true allyship for these folks who sacrificed or were willing to sacrifice everything is to change the Shire, right? Is to change the place, the places, the cultures where these people come back to. Um, and I think that's really important. And I just don't know that that's how we're talking about it widely. I think we still think that the transition is on the veteran and the integration is on the veteran. And if there's something that they're not understanding, if there's a cultural piece that they're not getting, if there's something they're getting hung up on, they need to fix it in order to conform with the civilian world, whatever that means. And it's a lot like imposter feelings, Gabe, right? Like, oh, you have imposter syndrome, fix it. Oh, you're having trouble integrating, fix it. I think that's an ass backwards way to have this conversation with people and a damaging one, right?
Yeah.
If a veteran is having a hard time integrating, in addition to figuring out how we might help, we also need to ask the much more difficult question about what we are or aren't doing to create an environment that is working actively to reintegrate them, right? And I just think that piece of the puzzle is the piece that we're not great at, but we're working on it. And these kinds of conversations are happening, and I don't have all the answers at all, but I think asking those hard questions about what role we play is increasingly important as we do this work.
I could not have said that better myself. And I'll just add on that we tend to think when then the suffering happens because we ascribed it to them, that that is hurting them, but we don't realize that that is really hurting us.
That's right.
And I think when we start to realize how and see that that hurts us when anyone is suffering under any label, our society as a whole is suffering in our own ways. So,
Yeah,
and so,
because when veterans suffer, people are suffering. And
right.
that's again these friggin' labels,
It's not
right? Like
veterans that are suffering, it's humans that are suffering.
there's a human being suffering, right? Like
Yeah.
that's exactly right, right? I mean, I just related, I myself have put a timestamp on this, but I'm gonna push my next meeting because I want to
Okay.
talk to you for a minute or two more. But it's we were talking about the difference between veteran friendly and something beyond veteran friendly yesterday and or the day before, and I sort of said, veteran friendly is we help veterans succeed, and something beyond veteran friendly is veterans help us succeed, right? Um, it's all the same words in a slightly different order. Um, and it seems like a subtle difference, and it's actually an earth-shattering difference in how we help veterans succeed. That's good. I'm not going to say we shouldn't do that. We should do that, right? But it's this sister realization, this adjacent realization that they're so close, they're touching, that that the very presence of these folks in our organizations is also enriching us. Um, and I think we sort of get that in some vague flag wavy way, but I don't know that we're taking it as seriously as we should be about the ways in which these folks change the chemistry of our classrooms, our workplaces, our schools, our civic organizations, our politics, our communities, right? They change the chemistry of the places where we live, work, and play. And the sooner we really start to get that, as opposed to thinking of all those places as places that need to help them. How ironic is it, Gabe, that when we aim all of our support at veterans, when we aim our career support at veterans, when we aim our academic support at veterans, when we aim our housing support at veterans, our wellness support at veterans, um, that's good, except it's also implicitly suggesting a brokenness, right? That's why whenever I do these kinds of soft skill trainings, it's it's perhaps available to the veterans, but the real audience are the civilians who surround them, right? Because again, integration is our job, not theirs. So
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I mean, we stink up on this pretty profoundly, buddy.
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly, I feel like a soul brother with just a different, slightly different words for whoever that audience is meant to hear, and I'm so grateful to know that not only do the veterans and their families have an ally like you, but to have an ally like you myself and as an organization is massive. So thank you so much for everything. We're definitely going to get you back on here to talk more because
I
people
I,
need.
appr- I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. And this is it's such a it's a gift to talk to you, to know you, and I feel the same exact way. It's good to know that someone's got this sensibility and they're putting it into some different words. I don't have a great beard. You have an awesome beard. Someone's going to hear you different than they hear me.
Just because of the
Um,
beard.
just for that alone, someone's going to say, I trust that guy. My beard, by the way, is these cauliflower ears.
Oh, there
Someone
you
sees my cauliflowers and they're like, I'm gonna listen to that guy.
go.
I don't make the rules, but thank you for the opportunity to amplify the signal of some of these thoughts, and I'm humbled and grateful.
Yeah. Amen, man. Well, thank you. And thank you all for watching. I hope you have a great weekend.